Angels in Our Hearts is a collection of foster care memoirs, and this is quite interesting because it's a collection from both Casey Watson and Rosie Lewis. I think this is a great way to inform readers about whichever foster carer they don't currently read. I actually have read both of them entirely, but if you're only familiar with one of their work, this is a pretty decent way to get a sample of the other writers' writing style or the type of children that they foster. So it's pretty decent. We actually have six short stories, four from Rosie Lewis and two from Casey Watson. I have reviewed all of these separately, so I'm not going to go into a tremendous amount of detail, but I'll talk a little bit about the types of stories you can expect and obviously provide a very brief review of whether I enjoyed the stories or not. But this will be spoiler free. So the first story we get is Helpless. This is about a little baby called Sarah who's born with drugs coursing through her system because her mother took drugs during pregnancy, and Rosie has to look after her. And the descriptions of Sarah being in pain are really difficult to read, but it's really lovely to see that there's so much support and care for this little baby who desperately needs love and affection and help. Well, it just has to wait, really, for the drugs to get out of her system. It's a heartbreaking read, but I think very moving at the same time. The second one is a story called A Small Boy's Cry. The first four, as I said, are from Rosie Lewis, and this one is about a little boy called Charlie. I can't remember exactly how old he is, but he's toddler-ish age, and he fell out of a window, and clearly he's been neglected, and we learn more about his home life and his mother. Not in any tremendous detail. These are, of course, very short reads. I'd say most of them are about a half hour, 40 minutes each. The longest one is the last one, At Risk, which is about an hour in length, but I'll get to that one in a moment. But Charlie is a very likable character. It's a relatively well written story, definitely very engaging. The third one is called Two More Sleeps, and this is about a little child called Angel, and Angel is found cowering under a park bench in the middle of winter. And Rosie looks after this child as an emergency placement, and this one definitely relies on unpredictability. Out of all of them, this is the one that I found to be the most unpredictable, the most compelling. I don't necessarily agree with the outcome in this story. I don't think social services acted as best as they could have done, but nevertheless, it's still a very interesting story. And the last one from Rosie Lewis is called Unexpected. This is another one with a little baby. I'm not the biggest fan of foster care memoirs about babies, simply for the fact that babies are, as characters, not that interesting. They can't do very much. But this one's actually about a mother who gives birth without even knowing she was pregnant. And this baby, called Hope, is staying with Rosie, and the mother has contacted Rosie's house, but she just doesn't really acknowledge Hope's existence. She doesn't want to touch the baby, she doesn't want to go near the baby, she barely looks at the baby. And Rosie wants to try and find out why this is. And of course, we learn about this, and it's eye-opening, it's fascinating, and it's nice to see that there is support there where it's needed. So the four stories from Rosie are fantastic, really great samples of the kind of stories you can expect from the rest of her work. The last two are from Casey Watson, and the first one is Just a Boy. And honestly, it's a relatively interesting read, but it's nothing like any other Casey Watson book or any other foster care memoir. So I think it was a bit of an odd choice to include in here. It's about a boy called Cameron who's blind, and he's just staying with Casey and her family because his grandmother has to go into hospital, and he's living with his grandparents, and his grandfather obviously needs to be at the hospital with the grandmother, so there's nobody to look after him until I think his uncle arrives, if I remember correctly. So it's really a weekend placement. He's a good kid, there are no problems. The point of the narrative is to show how people respond to blind people, and also to show just how much a blind person can do, that they're not as helpless as perhaps some people might think. So it serves a decent purpose, but it's nothing like any other foster care memoir. So I feel like it was a bit of an odd choice to include in here as a sample of Casey Watson's work, but nevertheless, it's absolutely fine. And the last one is probably my favourite out of all of them. It's not the best written in terms of the grammar. What I will say is that it's very, very apparent that Rosie Lewis's work is, grammatically at least, much sharper than Casey Watson's. And I assumed they would have had the same editors, so I was really surprised by that. Or at least the same editor for this collection. So it's quite interesting to see. But nevertheless, it's relatively well written, and it's about a boy called Adam. And it's supposed to be a very straightforward placement while Adam's mother is in hospital having an appendectomy. And there's more to it than Casey first thought, because Adam comes across as a very healthy, happy child, but according to his mother, he's very sickly. And I'll say no more than that. But I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's definitely my favourite of them all. If I had to rank them, I didn't know I was going to rank them until this second, but if I was going to rank them, I'd go At Risk, Two More Sleeps, A Small Boy's Cry, Helpless, Unexpected, and Just a Boy, I think. Possibly. Either way, they're all pretty decent. I liked all of them. It's a really solid, lengthy collection as well, with some really good samples from Rosie Lewis and one brilliant story from Casey Watson, and then a bit of an odd weak link with Just a Boy. It's well written, it's fine, but it's just not the usual kind of story we'd expect from a foster care memoir. Either way, I thoroughly recommend Angels in Our Hearts. These are all available separately as well. So if you've already read a few of them, it might be cheaper to buy the others separately. This is currently $3.99 on Amazon, which I think is a very reasonable price for this. Definitely worth the money, good value for money there. If you haven't read, that's for the Kindle version, of course. If you haven't read these or most of these, I'd say getting Angels in Our Hearts is definitely worth doing.